welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. Usually on this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre one series at a time. Right now, we're in the middle of a little summer break, but we're bringing you a bonus episode to review and discuss in depth one of the most anticipated horror movies of the year, what will probably be one of the biggest grossing horror movies of the year, It Chapter 2, which came out in cinemas this week. It Chapter 2, of course, as I'm sure you all know, is the much anticipated follow-up to It Chapter 1 from 2017, and it's an adaptation of the second half, the concluding half of Stephen King's classic novel about a bunch of kids in a town called Derry being terrorised by a clown called Pennywise. So this discussion will be initially spoiler-free. The first half of this episode, we will not spoil anything about the film. Me and my guest will simply be lending our thoughts and discussing whether or not we think the film did a good job. And then in the second half of the episode, after a spoiler warning, we will discuss the movie at length and in depth. Not only that, you're going to hear a little bit of my interview with It director Andy Muschietti and producer, his sister, Barbara Muschietti. So all of that is still to come. Now, if you're a Patreon subscriber, you'll know that this episode is actually a sort of second part of a two-part It extravaganza. Over on the Patreon channel, I was joined by Charlie Allbright, and we discussed every single sort of incarnation of It leading up to this point. So we discussed Stephen King's original novel, we talked about the 1990s miniseries starring Tim Curry, we even talked about the audiobook narrated by Steven Weber, and then we talked about It Chapter 1 from 2017. So if you want to hear our thoughts on all of those sort of previous versions and adaptations of It, you simply need to subscribe to our Patreon channel, patreon.com/evolution of horror, where you can hear all of those in-depth discussions. But let's crack on with our discussion of It Chapter 2. Joining me to discuss this movie is one of the biggest It experts in the world. He's just in the process of finishing his book, which is going to cover everything related to Stephen King's original novel and all of the adaptations. He's been on the podcast before discussing zombie flesh eaters, and I was so lucky to sit down and chat to him about this particular movie. So here is my chat with the brilliant Charlie Allbright. Charlie Allbright, welcome back.
Hello there, how are we, everybody?
I'm very good. We must stop meeting like this, Charlie.
Oh, I know, it's terrible.
In the bowels of the BFI to discuss clowns once again. So, for people that listen to the Patreon channel, they would have heard us talk about It, the book, Chapter 1, the mini-series. We covered quite a lot of ground on that episode, on that chat, didn't we? But just for people that didn't listen to that, just give us a quick overview once again, Charlie, of your kind of relationship, I suppose, with this text. I think it's fair to say, an It fan, right?
Just very, very slightly. Basic gist, I read it on a summer camp when I was a wee nipper, and I ended up, it got into my brain in the way that Pennywise tends to.
Yes.
And many years later, I finally thought, right, I'm going to have to get my doodah together. And I got a deal with Macfarlane to write a book on not just the film, not just the book, but everything.
Yes.
So the book I've done, which is forthcoming soon this year, hopefully, is everything from the book through to the miniseries, through to the films, through to the audiobooks, through to the fan cultures, incorporates interviews with the stars and the crew of different adaptations, and a world-first experiment that proves exactly why the story is so damn terrifying.
Fantastic.
And I can't wait for it to come out, so I'm really excited.
Amazing. So exciting. I can't wait to read it. So when we last had this chat, neither of us had actually seen It Chapter 2 yet. Now, we both went to see it together last week, didn't we? And we haven't really discussed it together yet, so I'm really excited to hear your thoughts. The movie is 2 hours and 49 minutes long, and just let's briefly run down, what did you think of It Chapter 1, very briefly, and what were your expectations going into It Chapter 2?
It Chapter 1 I really liked because I had read the leaked draft scripts beforehand and had seen how they, in the drafts, had mucked the characters up, done different things. In one of the drafts, for goodness sake, Stan and Mike are completely cut.
Right.
So seeing all of the characters there was great. Seeing the characters brought to life in a way that was vaguely kind of appropriate for the book was good. Having said that, I must admit I got a little bit peeved with the Let's Do Stranger Things Mark II.
Yes, it was very Stranger Things.
It was. I love the guys and the way they did it, but at the same time, it was the whole point of it is that it's a book about people overcoming absolute tragedy. These kids are broken. It is not the occasional bit of bullying and then, well, let's go and do a clubhouse or whatever.
Yeah.
In terms of chapter 2, expectations-wise, I was intrigued because a lot of the marketing was a lot more, it was a lot less, shits and giggles, quite frankly.
Right, yes.
But I was also really worried because of the casting. I mean, people like James McAvoy is a fantastic actor. Having said that, I was a bit worried that he looked too much a pretty boy.
Yes, we talked about this on the other episode, but you said, these characters are supposed to have sort of gone to seed a bit, right, in their lives, and they're being played by the most beautiful actors in Hollywood. That's the thing, isn't it? So,
completely, yeah. And it was, I think as well, when there was a lot of talk, one of the things they released early on was discussion about how Jessica Chastain as Bev gets drowned in the biggest scene with blood in it, whatever. I thought, oh God, here we go, Carrie Mark 2. Yes. And I was a bit worried it was just going to be effects, and that she was just going to go, do the whole feminism, TM act.
Yes.
Because I thought the whole point of Bev is she's really broken. She is, this is a woman who in the book gets off on the fact that she is not far off raped by her abusive husband.
Right, yeah. So you're right, because I think there is, I enjoyed it chapter 1 a lot, but I didn't like, similar to you, I think there's a glossiness to it which annoyed me a little bit, and I didn't really like the clown, I've got to say. I kind of liked the movie despite the horror rather than because of it. I wasn't scared by the clown and Bill Skarsgård's performance and his voice as the clown. I know a lot of people made Scooby-Doo comparisons there to his Pennywise voice, and a lot of CGI and a lot of kind of it turns into a bit of a haunted house ride at some points, which I wanted more of that, like you said, that kind of gritty human drama about the residents of Derry and what they're all going through. So I was very excited for part 2 because I think you're right, like you said, the marketing for part 2 shows that, okay, maybe this is going to be a bit weirder, a bit darker, maybe a bit more character based. 2.5 hours long, surely there's a lot of chance for meaty character stuff going on. So I went into it actually quite excited. And also, going back to the miniseries, I think it's fair to say most people are in agreement that the second half of the miniseries is quite weak compared to the first half, and the sort of spider effects and everything else. So I went into this one thinking, great, this I think should be good. It should be an improvement on the miniseries. I'm excited to see what they give me, kind of thing. So with that in mind, let's go into it then. We're going to do a spoiler-free chat first of all for people who haven't seen it. So we'll keep this brief and we won't go into depth, but just very briefly, Charlie, what did you think of It Chapter 2?
For once in my life, I am really undecided. I loved the fact that they kept the characters largely canonical. Mm-hmm. At the same time, and things like the bits that they did include, I thought, I'll be honest, I thought the actors were really good.
Really
I was
good.
surprised. I mean, Jessica Chastain, I thought, okay, seriously, I completely believe you. I take it all back because I've been one Amy Adams.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, she works with the Muschiettis a lot. She did Mama with them, stuff like that. Even people like Jay Ryan, who is the older Ben, people were saying, oh, just moons. I actually think he's pretty good.
Yeah, I do.
I'll tell you who the biggest revelation is, actually. Older Eddie. James Ranson. Okay, I'll be honest, am I okay to do a non-safe for work bit?
Yeah, go, of course.
Okay, basically, James Ranson, I'd never really heard of him before. And the thing is, I mean, for one thing in it, he gets Eddie so perfectly. He gets the eyebrow wiggle. He gets everything spot on. It's so believable. And yet the thing that fascinated me is he's believable in the role as well, because a number of years ago he did a film called Ken Park. Don't know if you've ever heard of it. For
No.
God's sake, don't look this up with your mum.
Oh, right, okay.
Flatmate showed me this, and basically there's a bit where he has what is known in Curtis circles as a fucking strangle-wank.
Wow.
He's meant to be a sadist, and you actually see him, well, literally kind of really going for it, and he comes on screen. Now, it sounds daft, but when you consider the actor's own branding as well, he was an addict for years, really serious hardcore.
Right.
It almost helps bolster his performance as Eddie is this incredibly medically broken dude. I mean, the only one that I wasn't as keen on, to be honest, and this is going to get me shot, was Mike. Isaiah Mustafa. He just felt a bit too light.
Yes, it was a bit light, yes.
Exactly, considering as though realistically what his character does, where realistically he is still, as per the book, kind of the one who is leading the action, who is directing it. It's like, you are talking about phenomenal cosmic powers. And yet it just has no oomph.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Whereas the rest of that, I mean, all the stuff that comes in the rest of the film, like the CGI and all the rest of it, and all the monsters are beautiful.
Yes. Well, that's what I was going to say. In some ways, this movie had more in connection. It reminded me more of films like The Thing than clown movies. You know, there was a lot of great monsters in this, which I really loved. You know, we won't spoil anything, but there's a moment in the Chinese restaurant, and again, if people know that scene from the book or from the miniseries, I thought that was done really well. I think you're right. The cast were really good. Eddie was definitely a highlight. Eddie and Richie, and Bill Hader, of course, who everyone is praising as Richie. They did brilliant jobs. Jessica Chastain was great. Yeah, I thought they did a good job. Yeah, you're right. I think Mike as a character in both parts has been a bit underserved, I think. It's quite sad. And I don't know why they've done that. You know, we talked about it with Chapter 1, how they took away the historian side of young Mike and they gave it to Ben. And so Mike didn't have much going for him other than he was the black kid, really, which is such a sad thing because they've made that character more almost tokenistic or something in Chapter 1. And they didn't really massively improve on that in Chapter 2, did they? So it's a shame.
No, I mean, considering as well something for when we do spoilers, what they do tweak in order to make somebody else tokenistic, it's like, stop it! You're perpetuating nonsense. And it just annoyed me. But then again, I mean, in terms of the effects as much as anything else, I at this point, I will actually apologise. I know I thumped you several times because I screamed.
One moment, your scream made me jump more than the film did. But I loved that. And actually, the movie did I think it actually scared me more than the first one did.
Oh, definitely.
Like I said, I wasn't really affected by the clown. Whereas this had some weird, out there set pieces that I really liked. I liked its imagination. And I think it does almost veer from horror into like fantasy. It's more like a fantasy movie or an adventure movie than a horror movie. But I was kind of okay with that. I was really along for the ride. You know, it was these kind of characters on a mission to kill a monster, you know, as opposed to kids being haunted by a monster. Yeah, so I really liked that about it. And of course, again, we won't spoil too much, but the young cast also come back in this for certain scenes where there are flashbacks and that kind of thing. Apparently they had to digitally de-age them, didn't they? Which is quite funny because obviously a lot of them have grown in the last 2 years. What did you think of that? I mean, again, they pack a lot into this movie. Do you think that works? Like the amount of story and the amount of beats that they have to hit within this film?
I think they're going to have problems because they've tried to make what is not a mainstream story in a lot of ways very mainstream. You know, you have, as you say, all the different, you have the cutesy kiddie elements. Yes. I mean, they've completely changed a couple of characters. Right. Within the context it works, but it just makes it too long. I mean, I think you get all the kind of character action, then it just filters out to effect after. Basically, they spunk their budget on the screen the last hour or so, and it works. But you end up, I'll be honest with you, towards the end, and I know that story back to front, inside out, and sideways. Yes. I began to think, okay, what's happening now? Yeah, it looks pretty, but why are you doing this?
Yes.
I actually I'll be honest, I lost my place. I literally did. I mean, I'm going to go see it again because I'm not sure of what happened in the conclusion because it was just so much.
It was a lot, and I do think that unfortunately, and it's really funny because there was a running kind of in-joke throughout the film. Bill's character is a writer, and there's a lot of references to, I really loved that horror book you wrote, the ending let it down. And, obviously there's a reference there to the fact that, not a lot of people like the ending of It. And so, again, I was really intrigued to see what they did with the ending of It. And I think you're right. Unfortunately, it is a bit messy still, isn't it?
It's bloody
that final
messy.
act. Yeah. Which is a shame because I loved everything building up to it. And it's still an improvement on the miniseries, but it is the last act. It's the final showdown in which I started to feel the length. I started to feel okay, what's happening now? I'm kind of ready for this to conclude in some way, which is a shame, but it still had me, I suppose, for most of it.
I think the problem I had with it was they tried to do kind of spin the tail on the ending, in the sense of that they tried to do so many different ways of hitting different marks.
Right.
And in the end, I think what they did in the end, particularly, I thought it was a letdown because I didn't. I'll explain why later, particularly, but I felt it actually contradicted the rest of what they were saying, which is I mean, the original ending is weird cosmological stuff that, quite frankly, unless you are a hardcore constant reader, King reader, you ain't going to get. But I just felt they were so busy. It's a film that has so much of a mind on the audience and not peeing anybody off.
Yes.
That it shoots itself in the foot and contradicts itself instead.
Yes.
It's beautifully done. I actually did like the CGI.
Yes.
I thought some of the earlier monsters in particular...
Yes.
I'll be honest, I don't, as I say, Pennywise has never scared me. There are a couple of times, and I'll be honest with you, I have a folder on my computer of every spoiler, every leaked piece of this, that, or the other. I thought I knew what was coming. I genuinely shat myself.
Yes,
Several times. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Because it works, because the way they do the monsters actually makes sense for the book.
Yeah, it really worked, didn't it? Yeah, and I that's the thing. And you know, there are still scary moments, and I think that audiences who still want to just go along to this wanting to be scared, they still will. I think there's enough in there, isn't there? There's a lot of jumps, there's a lot of fun to be had, but there's just a lot of other stuff going on in this movie as well. It's just a big, meaty, dense film, isn't it? And the one thing I did feel a little bit with this one is that I feel like there is a middle act where it's like, and I enjoyed it, but it's like, right, we've got to go through each of the 7 characters and what they have to do. And you know, I've read a couple of criticisms of, you know, it's too many characters. Do you think that it would have worked better as a film if they had scaled down the Losers Club, if they had made it a group of maybe 4 or 5 of them rather than 7, and they had condensed some of those character, you know, types and archetypes into, you know, 2 or 3 into one single character? I don't know.
I don't think it's that. I think the characters you have from the book actually work. The problem I think they had is that for some reason, and they didn't need to do this, they change some of the backstories when they go back as adults to make no blooming sense. And they try and, you know, each one has like a core scene that can be read a number of different ways. Instead, like with the character already, I won't say what happens, but they literally smoosh in about 5 different elements.
Ah, right, interesting.
And one thing I noticed as well with the backstories, one thing they do is some of the cast, shall we just say, I actually read an interview where they said that, you know, all of the cameos that didn't happen was actually a good thing, because each cameo Andy Muschietti has actually said would have added 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh God.
And so a lot of the running time, in fairness, is fan service, but it's almost the wrong kind of, in the sense that it's, here's a nod to XYZ other film, as opposed to, here is one single image that will make you think of this part if you know the story well.
Yes.
I mean, the one thing I did love, actually, that is very medium specific, was the music. There's one section in it where they actually bring something that comes very much from the book, in the sense of how music actually changes the way you think of the film.
Right, yeah.
Because it becomes this kind of, it begins to change the rhythm that your body actually moves to. And it's one of the ways in which Pennywise tries to communicate them, and it kind of establishes this beat that means it's not just visual, it's not just hearing him say something. Because it's music, and you don't automatically start listening to it, it kind of has this almost insidious kind of way of getting in your brain without you realising it.
Yeah, I don't think I even really consciously noticed the music. I can't think of what it was like now watching it, which I guess was a good thing. I was kind of engrossed in the story and the characters. That's really interesting. And King has a reputation, I think, as being this kind of... His books are both very skeezy and very cheesy at the same time, right? There is always a cheese element to his movies, particularly towards the end. And I think this movie does really go into cheesy territory at times. I mean, how did you find that aspect of it? I mean, I suppose that is part of the story, right?
Massively. I mean, I think the cheese element, it is there in the book, but in the book, it's very bittersweet, because at the end, obviously, they all end up losing their memories and stuff like that.
Yes.
Whereas I think with the film, it kind of works. I mean, this is very much, I felt, and I would love to find out how much say he had in the script. What I actually felt was the film is almost a reflection of King as if he wrote it now.
Right.
He's in a very different place life-wise.
Yes.
When he first wrote it, he'd not long since come out of being a massive cocaine freak.
Yeah.
He was in quite a bad place, even though he had all this professional success. Whereas now, you know, realistically, he's got a family he adores who are all in... You know, they've had their bumps and scrapes, but they're in a good place. He's, you know, one of the most famous authors in the world. And now, importantly, he has critical respect. 10 years ago, there were maybe 2 or 3 people writing on King.
Yeah.
Now there's an enormous glut, and people are showering him with accolades.
It's taken this long, hasn't it?
Oh,
it's taken
yes.
sort of 40 years, I think, for him to be respected by film critics and book critics. Yeah.
And it shows, and I think this film is basically... This is basically... I'll be honest, I've just written the conclusion to my own book, and this is basically what I'm saying. Whoops.
Great.
It's literally, this is the film of a guy who wants to slightly alter the legacy he is leaving.
Yeah. I can totally believe that. And then finally, final point, I've got to ask you, obviously, we've got to talk about the clown. Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise in this. How did you find him? How did you find him in comparison to part 1? Do we get as much Pennywise as we do in part 1?
I found him less effective.
Interesting.
I found far less effective. There were 2 bits I found effective, and both bits involved Richie.
Mm-hmm.
The other bit was not as effective in the extra bit that they do in it that is not canonical.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, I have read every sodding article that has come on the internet. I know this because I have a Google alert. I still don't understand it. What the hell?
Interesting. I can't wait to ask you about that. Okay. All right. Amazing. Well, I think we've danced around things as much as we can, but generally speaking, before we go into spoiler section, would you still recommend It Chapter 2 to horror fans and fans of part 1?
Yes, it's a very good... It has... I mean, if you know the book, there is enough in there that... Well, I spent the last third probably crying my bloody eyes out.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. You were really moved by it, which is... that can only be a great thing, right? That's amazing.
Well, there was enough in there that I very much got into it.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is a brilliant popcorn movie. The effects and the action, I mean, for all that it really is, okay, seriously, chuck in the kitchen sink and go and buy another one from B&Q to chuck that in as well.
Yes.
At the same time, it works and it's very, very pretty.
Yes, I agree. I think I liked it more than Chapter 1. I'd have to see it a second time. But
Yes.
Chapter 1, I was a little bit underwhelmed by, as I mentioned.
Yes.
This movie is trying to do so much more. It's ambitious and it's big and it's sprawling and it's a bit baggy, but I kind of respected it for all of the things it was trying to do. And it really kept me engrossed for the bulk of the running time. And despite the ending being a little bit weaker, like we'll get into, but generally speaking, I think it worked. I think it was great. Hello everyone. Now I'm going to interrupt this broadcast very briefly to give you a little bit of information about what we've had going on Patreon over the last few weeks. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, we finished our zombie series back in, it was a while ago now, I think it was early July, so we've not really had many main episodes coming out on the main podcast throughout the summer. However, we have been bringing listeners a new Patreon episode every single week. We've had some fantastic content with some really fantastic guests. Recently, I was joined by Alex Ayling to discuss the Scream sequels in depth. That's Scream 2, Scream 3 and Scream 4. I was also joined by my good friend and host of the brand new Journey Through Sci-Fi podcast, James Payne, to discuss Quentin Tarantino and his relationship with horror. And we also brought you an in-depth review of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And of course, this week I discussed It Chapter 1, It the miniseries, and It the novel with Charlie Allbright. So if you're enjoying this current chat with Charlie, you are not going to want to miss that discussion. We had some interesting thoughts on the miniseries with Tim Curry. So if you want to get on board, if you want to listen to all of this extra content, you simply need to sign up to our Patreon and donate $5 a month. That really helps support the cost of making the podcast, and it really helps kind of everything that we do here at the Evolution of Horror. So if you want to get involved, and if you're able to afford to help support the podcast, simply go to patreon.com/evolution of horror. If you sign up, you will get all of that bonus content. You'll also get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker if you're based in the UK, and you'll get a little special shout out on the podcast as a thank you. And on that note, I want to give all of our new patrons that have signed up over the last few weeks a special thank you and a shout out. So a big thank you to Alan Wilby, Stephen Dovidus, Paul O'Rourke, Ellie Hope, Colin, Christian Butcher, Virat Pal, Ewan Rayner, Daniel Sercom, Lucas Calivoda, Tim Scopes, Sarah Owen, Kevy Canavan, Carl Hanks, Hayley Ukulele, Nicola Marchant, Renata, Daniel Medcalf, Adam Kimio, Dark Lord Chuckles, Nick Thompson, Jill Nolan, legend, Rick Eccles, Christian Desario, Bradley Andrew, Elizabeth Ruby, Cassandra Reagan, Jane Reeves, Paul and Claire Vaughan. A big thank you to all of those wonderful people for donating their hard-earned cash to help support the podcast. And one more time, if you want to sign up, if you want to be treated to all of this bonus content and more, simply go to patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. Okay, in a minute we're going to get onto our spoiler discussion of It Chapter 2. But first of all, I'm going to play you a little snippet of my interview with the director and the producer of It Chapter 2. Andy Muschietti is by now a very well-known and respected horror director. He made the brilliant Mama from a few years ago, which I know is such a favourite amongst so many horror fans. He also, of course, directed It Chapter 1. And his sister, Barbara, also happens to be the producer. I sat down with them in Waterloo Vaults, one of the scariest venues in London, to sit in the dark at 9 a.m. and discuss all things It. Now, once more, this is a spoiler-free interview, so you can listen to the interview before we get into the spoiler section. So here we go. Here is my chat with Andy and Barbara. Andy and Barbara, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Happy to be in London.
Yeah, how long do you get to spend in London? How long are you here?
4 days total.
Not enough.
Not enough.
No. Have
and
you
it's
seen,
sunny.
What do you think of this immersive experience in the
It's
vaults?
amazing.
It's pretty cool.
We did it like
Incredible.
4 times yesterday.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a lot of fun and it's scary also.
Yeah. I
the
love
best
it.
part is the part where you can't take pictures because it's so dark. That's
Right, exactly.
amazing.
Yeah. So I've got to ask you, It Chapter 2, did you guys know from the beginning, before It Chapter 1, that this film would come to pass, or was it dependent on the success of
It
Chapter
was
1?
always in our minds. You know, me as a storyteller was always like in the back of my head. It was like there is a second part that needs to be told. Of course, like, you know, from the studio standpoint, there's other considerations where, you know, well, we'll see how this does. But it was everyone's plan, actually.
Did any of the success of It Chapter 1, did any of that inform or change what you were thinking story-wise for Chapter 2?
No, not really. The only thing that changed is that they gave us more money, so the story could be told, you know, in a bigger canvas. Make more justice to, you know, the size and the scope of the story, which is epic.
It is. Barbara, it's a really epic story, this one, isn't it? What are the big challenges in bringing a story like this to life?
Well, you know, basically with the first film, we covered about 300 pages of the book. The second part, we were covering a lot more, about 900 pages. And we needed to include, we wanted to include, because it was Andy's vision, the dialogue between the timelines. So we had the kids and the adults, which means you have double the cast and really double the stories. Massive undertaking, but I think we pulled it off, so I'm very happy.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about working with the young cast again. Is it true that you kind of had to age them down a little bit, because obviously they'd grown up?
A little bit, yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, well, they were 12 and 13 when we did the first movie. Second time over, they were 14 and 15. So, you know, things change, apparently, when you hit that age. And we did a little digital here and there, but, you know, it's not part, like, everyone that sees the movie just, like, you know, it's so well done that actually nobody questions that these are not the kids. You know?
Yeah.
I think it was reminiscent for both the kids and their parents to see them as little kids again. It was quite a shock, but in a beautiful way. You know, we get our kids back.
When, you know, It Chapter 1 was so huge, so successful, does that make things easier going into It Chapter 2, or does that make it scarier for you?
I got excited because I got the chance to tell the second part of the story. And I got, you know, probably a bigger budget with more resources to tell the story as it should. But yeah, there was no pressure.
In the story, there's Bill's character as a writer, and there's a lot of jokes about how his book was great up until the ending. Were you worried about the ending of this story and how to make it good?
No, not at all.
I mean, was.
You were, yeah. I think it's a great conclusion of a great story. Yeah, it's a great question, but I wasn't worried about it. No.
No, it was just the time. We were basically given a time to do prep, shoot, post, which was 2 years. So it was a race to get to the story we wanted, but we did. So.
There's, as well as Pennywise, we've got some other really interesting monsters in this. Some really great monster design and creature design. Some of it reminded me a bit of movies like The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. I just wondered, were there any sort of film references or inspirations that you drew from?
All my influences and references come from it's a mishmash of things that happened to me when I was a kid. The 80s were a massive, absorbing era where the most important influences imprinted me, and I can quote The Thing, John Carpenter and Sam Raimi with Evil Dead, John Landis, American Werewolf in London, Joe Dante, Spielberg. All of those were big influences in me as a horror storyteller. I don't go back when I'm telling a story or when I'm approaching production. I don't go back to movies. I know that there's a lot of filmmakers that do. I try to stay away from it and just draw from that mass of of inside inspiration or creativity that I have. I don't want to copy when it comes to to starting thinking and visualizing a movie. That's why I stay away from other movies, because I don't want to copy. And drawing from one's creativity, when you have a substantial body of influence, as you say, it's fun.
Pennywise is obviously a terrifying character. When I was growing up, I was terrified of Tim Curry, Pennywise, when I was young. And I just wondered, what do you think, in your opinion, why are clowns scary? Why do we find clowns so scary?
I don't think they were ever supposed to be funny, to be honest. I find them to be, grotesque caricatures of human beings. It's not, I don't know how they ever got to that role, that they were supposed to be entertaining.
I don't think kids ever were
no one likes clowns.
At ease. But somehow adults think that, this is, kids and clowns, should have fun.
Yeah, don't trust them. They're not trustworthy. How important was it to stay true to the book? And were you able to kind of differ or divert from the book, from the original text? And how much control or input does Stephen King have on this film?
So this, the story of the book has a heart, has a spirit, and has a soul, has a journey of this character. So I wanted to stay true to the, basically the emotional journey. But if you go to the core, you don't need to, to basically abide by every single event the way it's written. In fact, the book is written in a much looser, narrative. When you make a movie, an adaptation, you have to translate it to a film language. So that means that you have to do a lot of changes for the film experience to work. You have to, basically turn all the screws that makes the story more tense. You have to make every single event consequential with what's been going on, and basically build a film experience, which is different than a literary experience. So everything that needs to be changed for the film experience to be successful, while you're staying true to the spirit of the story and the characters, that's what you got to do.
Is it difficult to get a kind of tonal balance as well? Because there are moments of the book and the story that are quite fun, quite funny, quite childlike, and then there is some really adult, gritty stuff as well. Is that difficult, sort of getting that balance?
No, I think there's an instinctive, balancing act that I've been doing with these two movies, and I think it has a lot to do with having Stephen King as a teacher. Growing up, I learned from storytelling. I learned storytelling from him a lot, I think. And there is, even though as we discussed before, like the literary format is different than the film language, there is a like instinctive way of translating it that I kind of feel I can do.
The film's 2 hours and 45 minutes long. Were you ever worried that this was too long?
It's the perfect length to tell a story. It is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of story to tell, I suppose, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a longer version of this movie.
Yeah.
There's a 4-hour version. There's a 3:25 version. 2:45 is a thrill ride because we really like sucked off all the fat of what was a longer version. The story has a big, great propulsion, and it's very exciting. It is a thrill ride.
Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you
very much. Now it's the moment you've been waiting for. We're going to get into our spoiler discussion of It Chapter 2. So this is your final spoiler warning. If you haven't seen It Chapter 2, be warned. We're about to discuss everything up to and including the ending. Here we go.
For 27 years, I dreamt of you. I craved you. I've missed you.
We need to finish it. For good.
I've seen all of us die. It consumes us from the inside until we don't have a choice anymore.
You lied. And I died. You lied. And I died.
The first thing I want to ask you about, Charlie, is the opening scene, where we've got the character. Remind me of the character's name, because it's a character we didn't see in Chapter 1, wasn't it? A character from the book getting killed, the gay character.
Adrian Mellon.
Adrian Mellon, right. So because it's been a long time since I read the book, but I remember you talking about the character of Adrian Mellon when we last chatted. And what did you think of that? Did you know that this character was going to pop up in Chapter 2 and that we were going to see this opening set piece?
I did indeed.
Right.
One thing they have done from the word go, the biggest difference with, I think, this from the book is they are trying to be so woke it's painful.
Interesting, yeah.
I mean, with it, the original book, it was, as we said kind of previously, it was partly based on King thinking of the fairy tale of the three Billy Goats Gruff.
Yes.
At the same time, it was based on the actual murder of a guy called Charlie Howard in Bangor.
Yes.
When King first moved there. And the idea, as is replicated in the film,
Yes.
is that this guy, gay, very, very flamboyant, was, as you see in the film, walking home from a fairground. And a group of homophobes go after him because he's got a daft hat on. And they basically eat the crap out of him and chuck him in the canal. Now, I knew this was going to be coming, so I made a massive song and dance right from months ago about how they were going to include this because of a way of highlighting homophobic crime.
Okay.
And I thought the interesting thing was they make it far more realistic. In the book, he is very, very camp. And when his boyfriend goes to the police station, he's said to be wearing pants that are so tight they show the wrinkles in his cock. It's beautiful. Whereas in the film, his boyfriend, apart from the fact he's wearing a daft hat, they are far more heteronormative. And also, I mean, the thing I noticed in the film version is they make some of the characters far younger, so there could be a sense, arguably, of whether or not they all have culpability. I thought almost they missed a trick because I don't think you see anything from Adrian's point of view, which I thought could have been quite powerful because he literally gets stamped on.
Yes.
And they don't go that far.
No. That's true. It's still quite a powerful scene, though. Actually, again, there's the I keep saying it, but it's the kind of human horror element of this story that I really like and am affected by more. And I really wasn't expecting the scene to open with this, you know. And again, it almost kind of feels less scary than when you see the clown when he gets chucked into the river and you see the clown standing on the edge of the riverbank. I'm like, oh, okay, fine, we're back to normal kind of It territory now. But yeah, I found it quite powerful.
It was. I mean, it's funny because it's so reminiscent of things that actually happened. I mean, for me, I'll be honest with you, I found that incredibly hard to watch because the night I got my book contract, the same damn thing happened to me. I was wearing a hat and I walked home and, you know, I got jumped on by people who were phobic. Yeah. And, really eerie coincidence. It was literally, I actually found it hard forcing myself to watch it. But then again, I felt they were making a statement by putting it right at the beginning and putting it so that, the first shots you get are of the carnival, which you've got obviously the big kind of Pennywise-esque face at the back. But having hate crime so quickly on, and because it's a film, it's a theme that then permeates the film. I actually thought that was very much a way of making a stand about different types of identities that they will champion. I think it would have been, I'll be honest with you, one of the things I think they could have included and cut out some of the stuff later, it would have been useful to see the police reaction that we get in the book, even if just for a 2-minute sequence, because the whole point in the book of showing this is not just the actual crime. Kids are kids, are little shits, we all know this. It's the fact that when Don, the boyfriend, goes to report it, the police basically treat him, they're basically incredibly homophobic.
Right, yeah. Because, that's true, because there's a hint of that kind of thing in the first one that I really loved, where Ben is about to be carved into his, he's going to have his stomachs carved, and adults drive past, and they kind of ignore it, and nobody helps him, and there's this feeling that the whole town of Derry is fucked in some way, like that nobody will help and everyone is kind of weirdly culpable on these crimes and everyone knows what's going on but is ignoring it. And I kind of wanted a bit more of that, and you're right, maybe if we'd had some follow-up to that where we'd had the authorities themselves ignore it or something, but I still thought, there's a lot of even horror films nowadays, I think, where you would see the bully characters get their comeuppance from Pennywise or something, or get the most nasty deaths out of everyone, and we don't get that in It, and it is still these poor victims that end up getting finished off by Pennywise. So I did find that really, it is quite a dark opening to this film, and it did feel like, oh, okay, we're in different territory now, we're not in Stranger Things anymore, which I really liked about it. Also, is Richie gay? Right? So the film is suggesting, though, right, that Richie is gay.
It's horseshit.
Right, interesting. What did you think of that, though? Did you mind that element being added in?
I don't... Okay, this is really tricky. For the film, I thought I actually quite liked it.
Yeah, I didn't mind that addition. I thought it was an interesting extra dimension to Richie.
Yes.
But I wish they'd planted that seed in the first one. It felt a little bit retroactively, let's put that in now on the second part kind of thing.
In terms of the film, I mean, all the stuff, the bit we were saying earlier where you get Pennywise singing, he starts going, I know your secret, you're dirty. Yeah. It works beautifully because it sounds like a kid's chant.
Yes.
And the way that I thought it was handled by just lots of, I say little gestures, you get a sequence where Richie is, when he's an adult, he goes into this arcade and is playing with this guy, and you get this extreme close-up of them kind of, him holding onto the guy's hand as they're saying goodbye, just, they're doing the kind of hand slap thing, slightly too long, and then just to make sure everybody knows, Bowers comes in and says something, you faggots, like, sorry, did we miss like 2 seconds? Did we? Oh, bloody hell, come on, we're not that stupid.
Yeah.
And
it's a little bit on the nose. Yeah,
it's too much, because the whole idea is, partly because it wasn't in the first one, it's a bit of a late bloody add-in. There were bits that were quite sweet, like when he goes out to what is known as the Kissing Bridge and inscribes the initials. The reason I get cross about it, to be fair, is just because, like with Reddy, the so-called Richie-Eddie relationship thing, and also that some people say that I think it's Eddie's having a thing with Stan and that Eddie has a thing with Bill.
Oh, really? Amazing.
Oh, yeah.
Is this like all fan fiction going on or something?
It actually isn't. There's a book by a guy who, it's John something, I can never remember his name, and I'm going to be really naughty here, called The Closet and the Clown, that's basically a queer theory readings. It came out a few years ago. I completely agree with the guy that there is a lot of queer stuff coming through. Hello, Adrian Mellon.
Yeah.
retroactively saying that these characters are all queer is just nonsense.
Right, yeah.
There is
yeah.
nothing. It's very explicit in the book that Richie fancies Greta Bowie, who comes in the film as the girl who, in chapter 1, led the bullying of Bev.
Ah, right.
And also Bev, of course. They all fancy Bev.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's it. There is not a single hint of queerness in the first one, and you know, even if they just planted a couple of seeds, and it did feel a bit like, oh, let's shove this in now, sort of in the second film, which is a bit of a shame.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the problem I had with it was there was a lot of, I don't know, retconning of so many of the characters. I mean, you know, so much of the idea of the adults and the kids is that their lives are meant to follow on. You know, with Bill, for God's sake, there was no bloody suggestion at all in the first film of him being a writer, and it is so important to that character. Whereas all of a sudden, magically, he's a scriptwriter.
Yes, and they've lessened, haven't they, the role of Audra, his wife, right? She had a lot more going on, both in the miniseries and in the book, right? They've kind of cut that out almost completely, haven't they? Again, did you miss that? Did you think that was needed, or was that all right?
Personally, I never found her that much of an interesting character, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
But then again, the idea of the book and the miniseries is there are more stakes for it. He's got this personal connection that also disables him once he gets in there. The fact that she's almost made into this slightly harpyish character who he just has a go at the beginning, I actually kind of like, to be fair. Because, you know, one of the first things that you get is while they're having a go at him saying, you know, your endings are crappy.
Yes.
Because in this sense, he's very much a cipher for King.
Yes.
He actually says to her, why can't you be who I want you to be? Because she's the actress whose role they're saying needs work on. And then he says, I mean, you know, the character, and he kind of backtracks. And I like that because it makes him the slight arsehole that he is in the book.
Right, yes.
But then again, by taking him out, taking her out at the end, it means that when he does have a good old-fashioned smooch with Bev, you're not thinking, okay, so you cheat on your wife. How does that work for your morals?
That is it. I did wonder that again. Are they basically giving Bill a bit of an easier time, because they're like, well, we set up the wife to be a bit naggy, so therefore when he has a smooch with Bev, is that, you know, we won't judge him almost. You know, It does feel a little bit like the film is kind of going, it's okay, don't worry about that. You know, don't worry about the fact he's cheating on his wife. Yeah. James McAvoy, obviously, you know, Bill. At the beginning, he doesn't seem to have the stutter, and then he returns to Derry, things start happening, and the stutter starts to come back. How do you think he does with that, the sort of stammer?
A tricky one. The fact that it isn't explained what's happening annoyed me.
Yeah.
The thing that really irritated me is, I mean, okay, people's stammers vary hugely in terms of... it can depend. Some people literally stammer with certain people. Some people, it depends on emotions. Some people, you know, it's all different things. Personally, I'm going to get shot again. I felt it looked a lot more like Tourette's at points. He went too over the top, and he didn't do what Jaden Martell did. I also felt that at times it was bad for no reason, and yet at other times miraculously vanishes. And also, I mean, the one thing that I will say is a bit where he jokes when he is with Bev in the lobby. That makes sense, because what you sometimes find, one thing I find, is that if I pre-formulate the sentence beforehand, easy. If I'm thinking on my feet, that's when I go to shit.
Oh, yeah, totally. As do we all. Yeah, absolutely. So you get the first act, which is kind of, you know, the section we're all quite familiar with, which is where they all receive the phone calls, you know, they all sort of come back together. Then you get the first what feels like proper sort of monstery set piece where they all reunite and come to the Chinese restaurant. What did you think of that whole scene and the way that was directed and handled?
I loved it.
I did.
Really
I think it might be my favourite bit in the film, or one of my favourite moments in the film. I really loved it. I liked all of their chemistry, seeing them all come together for the first time, and then I loved the monsters. There was that, like, cockroach with a baby's head on it that I thought was absolutely chilling and brilliant. I loved it.
That gave me the heebie-jeebies. Again, it's like, you know, this is proof that I don't just go for canon. I mean, so much of that, it was non-canonical, but it worked absolutely beautifully.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, even, you know, it's the way, I think they actually used practical effects they hadn't seen before there as well, so I think those reactions are actually real.
Oh, right. Oh, great. Like in Ridley Scott's Alien, they kind of showed it for the first time.
Also, I mean, in fairness, also in the miniseries, they did that there as well.
Yes.
I thought it worked beautifully, and it's... Yeah, I mean, even just the fact they balance things like that bloody baby, which, I'm sorry, is just wrong in the best possible way.
It is. It's creepy.
With the stuff like the very, very basic just words on paper.
Yes. Oh, I loved that bit as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that bit. I thought that was really clever.
It grounds it.
It grounds it, yeah. I really think that was good, and I thought, yeah, we're in for something good here. You know, less clowns, more creepy, ooey gooey creatures and monsters. I was all for that, yeah. Really enjoyed it. We have these other kind of set pieces that it cuts away to in the first act as well. So we've got the little girl at the baseball game, which is more reminiscent of like the Georgie scene or something, isn't it? What did you think of that moment? Because for me, again, it sums up, you know, the Pennywise thing for me, where I find him scary up to a point, and then when he shows his teeth, I'm taken back a little bit. But what did you think of it?
Personally, I thought that was the best Bill Skarsgård actually plays it.
Yes, agreed.
By a long way.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'll be honest with you, I thought it was a bit... He didn't do enough for me. I thought it was a bit boring.
Well, maybe because we knew exactly... We'd seen this now so many times. Yeah. We knew where this was going, didn't
well, exactly, we? And she just... It wasn't enough. I mean, she was... I mean... The whole thing about the facial mark was something, but I thought, again, you're over-egging it. And it's you're taking a long time to add a character that doesn't need to be there.
Yes. Because I was thinking of it in the equivalent terms to the miniseries, and I guess it's kind of like the little girl in the garden at the opening of the miniseries being killed by it when Pennywise when he stood in the washing line. You know,
yes,
kind
Carol Ann.
Carol Ann. Yeah, Carol Ann. It is
Wrong bloody film.
You're right, Laurie Ann. And I was thinking, this is kind of a sort of remake of that scene, isn't it, in a way, where you get a girl being killed in the present day by the clown.
Yes.
And I still think, and again, I know it's subjective, and I grew up watching the miniseries, I still find that opening scene of the miniseries scarier than that baseball game moment with the little girl. You know?
Oh, exactly. There was a lot of build-up, and that's it. Whereas the whole thing with the miniseries is you get this, you don't really, the focus is on other things, and then you just come straight to Corey and it's quick. Whereas with this, it's like, okay, no, we've seen you do this before, dude.
Yeah, we've seen it. We know where it's going. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I was much more interested by all of the other stuff going on. You know. To
be honest, I'm still fanboying over Bev's sequence.
Oh, yeah. Well, let's talk about... So I think my favourite section is this kind of middle act where, you know, they get put on this kind of mission by Mike, don't they? Because there's all of this that, again, was not in the miniseries at all. About the kind of what do they call it? That object, that kind of like Native American thing.
Oh God!
And where they've got to do this ritual, and they've got to, you know, and they've all got to go and collect like a kind of totem. They've all got to go and collect something from their past, haven't they? Like an object. So then we get middle act is each of these kids, each of the six, because obviously we'll talk about Stanley as well, but each of the six has to go back to their childhood, revisit their sort of childhood trauma, and collect an object. And we get all the different characters having their different moments. Bev's is definitely a highlight, isn't it?
I didn't think I'd like that because of the way they've changed it. I'll be honest, that scared the shit out of me.
It scared the shit out of me as well. And they obviously, people who have seen the teaser trailer for Chapter 2 will have seen this scene, but it's where she goes back to Mrs. Kirsch, is that right? Mrs. Kirsch, who lives in Bev's old house, goes in for a cup of tea, and then things start getting very weird. And yeah, the brilliant shots where she's sort of naked and sort of writhing around in the background every now and then, sort of creeping about in the kitchen, that was all great. And then when you actually see her and she's this kind of like giant demonic creature sort of coming after her, I thought it was great.
Oh, it's marvellous. I'll be honest, I don't know if it's just me misremembering, but I'm sure there was something, they actually mentioned something about Hansel and Gretel, which they do, don't they? And it's and it makes it so much, it makes so much more sense because she suddenly becomes this little girl who is going, you know, who's being chased by something that is actually going to eat her.
Yes, and wandered into the witch's house, hasn't she? It's great.
It's beautiful because it's also, it's I think that character as the monster was played by Javier Botet. I think, yes. So I know he does the leper. I think he does one or two others.
Yes. Makes sense. He's brilliant, isn't he? And it's something about the movement and everything, you know, really works. What I really loved about this movie that I keep reiterating really is I just love that they show you the monsters. Yes. I love the creature designs, the monsters, and they really don't shy away from that, even if it can risk going into laughable territory with some of these moments. And I think all through that Bev scene, people in our screening were kind of nervously laughing / jumping, weren't they? But that's what makes it so much fun, I think.
Well, exactly. And I think, to be honest with you, it's because, you know, when you think of the idea of monsters, there is this whole thing of, oh, you're being really silly. But at the same time, to me, whenever you get those kind of movements where the body is slightly extended and it becomes robotic, it's this idea of, you know, uncanny valley is a really quick and easy thing to say, but it's far more this idea of this. If this is a projection of your brain, then what the hell is in your brain?
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, it's so true. Yeah, I loved it. What else do we get? So we get Bill going back to the pawn shop.
Yes.
Of course, we've got a Stephen King cameo. Did you know that? Did you know Stephen King was going to make a cameo? Of course you did.
I did. I tipped somebody who, bless them, shall remain nameless, upside down to tell me everything before I'd seen it.
Yes.
It's an interesting one because in that sequence, I don't know if this came across at all, because I know that sequence inside out. I've done a bloody chapter on it. The whole point is he sees Silver, because he's noticed kind of people's accents when he's gone back into the city limits. And that's when he really gets the full force of his stutter coming back.
Yes.
And the whole idea is... in the book, you get this internal dialogue where he's saying, what the hell is going on? In the sequence, you don't really get that. You get the kind of King's character as a shopkeeper kind of taking the mickey.
Yes.
You don't necessarily understand why. Now, then this like whole extra bit of, you can afford to buy this bike for extra money, and it becomes, the scene kind of changes a bit. I'm not sure how much it comes across to people exactly what's going on.
Yeah. Well, no, that's true. I mean, it was a funny scene, and that's kind of it, really, in some ways, that moment. And it was a little wink to the audience, because once again, we had Stephen King going, liked your book, didn't like the ending, and all of that kind of thing.
Exactly. Whereas in the book, it's meant to be incredibly traumatic for him, because it's literally he's meant to be the leader, and he's seeing his main method of leading fragment in front of his eyes, and there's nothing he can sort him do. Whereas, as you say, it ends up becoming, because also he doesn't kind of lead the ritual of Chud in this one.
Yes.
It's all of a sudden it becomes kind of irrelevant.
Right.
As you say, it just becomes a canonical in-joke.
Yes, interesting. And then we get Eddie's, which is, you said, was they've changed quite a lot about Eddie's. Is that right? So he goes back to the chemist, and there's all the stuff about, the placebo, and there's the old chemist, right? The old man chemist who's still there, who he goes back to. But this version, then you have all that weird, creepy stuff where he goes down into a basement, and there's a kind of weird, or is that his childhood? I can't remember whether that's present day or past, where he goes back into that kind of old, dirty, grimy surgery and everything in the dark.
Well, from what I can remember, and as I say, it's the type of thing I need to see again. When he goes down into the basement, it's child him with his mum. That's right. Then all of a sudden he's fighting with the leper again, who basically pukes all over him.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that... by the way, if you're into it, cameo spotting, Andy Muschietti in the background.
Right. Interesting. He and Eddie is a character they've introduced at the beginning. He is... he's got a different job. He doesn't own a limo company, does he? He's like a risk assessment or something. Again, quite on the nose, isn't it? Quite on the nose. They've given him a job that looks for risks. But that was quite funny. But then he's married to a woman who looks just like his mum, right? He's married a woman who is a big woman.
Yes.
And they kind of... There's a lot of kind of jokes about that he's still this mama's boy, but has married somebody identical to his mum, right?
And that's what amazed me, to be honest, because they're trying to be so bloody woke in this.
Yeah.
And yet they've got them doing, you married a 300-tonner, that's how brave you are, right at the end. It's like, seriously, guys?
I know.
You're fat shaming on Ben, but what the message? Get it right.
It's weird that, wasn't it? Yeah, you're right, because we had a whole conversation, didn't we, about how they kind of removed the fat shaming of Ben from the goodies in the first one. But they're all over poor Eddie's wife and mum in the second one. So yeah, that was a weird decision they made.
It's very bizarre. I mean, I suspect. Judging by, we'll get to Mike in a minute, but judging by what happens with Mike, I suspect what's happened is they've had a lot of rewrites.
Yeah, very possibly. Yeah, I would say so. I think a highlight for me was Richie's scene. Like you said, you really enjoyed it as well. Again, I remember from the miniseries, there's that whole section when he goes to the library and all the balloons and exploding and bloods. They've completely got rid of all that. They've got this moment, like you mentioned, where Pennywise is going, "I know your secret," and then you've got this giant, what is it, like a lumberjack statue in the middle of Derry that comes to life.
That's
wonderful.
Real. That actually exists in Bangor. It's Paul Bunyan.
Right,
he was a logger.
Right.
That was actually real. That was one where I think I did hit you again.
Yeah,
that scared the living shit.
That was the moment when you jumped so much it made me jump, but it was brilliant. It was very well directed. I loved all of the background characters who all suddenly stopped what they were doing and looked at Richie. Everything kind of became possessed within the frame, and it really worked.
Oh, very much so. And it's like I think it's either that one or the first one where you get Richie, where if you look in the background you can actually see Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise is on the stage as well.
Yes.
I really thought that was marvellous because both characters played it so well. And you say the direction, the sheer fact that they allow the monsters to move as monsters. It's not just cut to the face. You actually see them moving. It makes it more realistic.
Exactly. And there must be such a temptation, I think, in this day and age to not really show that, or show a little bit of it, or put it in shadows or something. But this is like broad daylight, big monstrous statue literally coming after him, and there was a kind of unabashedness about it that I loved.
Yeah,
I really loved.
I think, to be honest with you as well, that kind of works because of the way that Bill Hader plays Richie, and also that he's shown. I mean, the first time you see him, he's puking on the camera.
Yes.
And it means that he's allowed to be extra. Everything about him is allowed to be, because he does it so convincingly.
Yes. But it must be a difficult thing with the character of Richie, and there is this kind of balance of horror and comedy throughout him, isn't there? And this character that is obviously quite damaged, but he's also kind of the light relief in the story as well, isn't he? In terms of the dynamics of the group, him and Eddie together as a pair kind of have a lot of the comedy beats and a lot of the comedy moments. But they do a good job of balancing that kind of the horror with the comedy, which I always think is a hard thing to get right in film.
Oh, very much so. I mean, in the book, of course, with Richie, his thing is meant to be either that he has ADHD, kind of unspoken ADHD.
Yes.
Partly also the glasses.
Yes.
The bullies chase him, saying, gonna break your glasses for face. And also that he's meant to have protruding teeth. He gets called Bucky Beaver.
Right. Yeah.
And so I suppose the thing with all that is in woke times that's kind of harder to sell than the whole gay narrative, and so I suspect that's why they actually changed it up. But then again, with the comedy stuff, I felt that was kind of weird, because I mean they've completely changed Eddie's character in the film, so that he is this spunky, sarky little kid.
Yeah.
Which I must admit I actually kind of prefer, because in the book he's a miserable little bastard.
Yeah, I think it works. I think it works. It makes him he's just very charismatic, Eddie, for the character that was, like the sort of quiet, miserable weakling sort of character, at least on the face of it initially.
Oh, yeah.
I really thought that worked. I really liked what they did with those two. And Ben is an interesting one, because Ben, he seemed to be the only one that didn't have a moment in his adult life. So he goes back to the school, and we get that scene with Ben and Bev. There's so many B names, isn't there?
Yes.
Bill, Ben and Bev. Where he has that scene with Bev in the classroom, which is great, and he hides in the locker, and that was great. And then nothing happens to present day Ben, does it? I can't remember.
No.
Because with the rest of them, it's like, oh, and now something's going to happen to them as an adult, and it doesn't.
Dude, did you spot the cameo?
Which cameo? I can't remember now.
In the first sequence where you get introduced to him when he's talking about his architecture.
Yes.
Did you see it?
I didn't.
The tall guy is Brandon Crane, who was the original young Ben.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, that's really nice. I didn't spot that at all. But yeah, I felt like he was kind of he was deprived of a Pennywise moment in this film. He didn't really get one as an adult.
He didn't, and he's an interesting one, because in terms of the whole idea of what he's representing, I had a quick look on his IMDb earlier. He actually played Vincent in a TV version of Beauty and the Beast.
Ah, okay.
And it's like, so much of the dialogue there in some ways, this idea again that he has to become the handsome prince. It's a bit scary with.
Yeah.
The whole idea that he's set up, for like the end bit where he finally gets together with Bev in the water. It's like, this is actually a little bit weird, but as you say, there is this idea that he isn't as broken. His only thing is, it's
like he's already overcome his demons by the time he's an adult, whereas you still got Bev being brutally beaten by her husband and everything else, and he seems to be doing great, right?
He's fine. Exactly. He's the only thing about him that is one of the things that critics have picked up on is that he's just mooning a bit for Bev. The childhood sequence where I must admit the bit where you see him as a kid, kind of, unless that was meant to be kind of almost some kind of flashback that never happened in a weird way. I thought that was brilliant, and it shows how good an actress Sophia Lillis is as well.
It was very good. I loved her. I missed her a little bit in this one, actually. But yeah, it's him kind of going in for a kiss with Bev, and then her turning out to be Pennywise, and she sort of insults him, doesn't she? It was a great scene. And doesn't that happen in the miniseries with adult Ben?
Yes, it does.
So Bev comes to his room, and sort of coming on to him, and then it's kiss me, fat boy.
Exactly,
it's that, isn't it? I was waiting for that to happen in this one. So when we saw that flashback, and then Ben goes back to the hotel, and he talks to Bev at the bottom of the stairs, I thought, oh, is this not really Bev? Is that what's going to happen? But it just was. So yeah, I was quite surprised by that.
I have a funny feeling that they do actually use that line somewhere.
Yes, they probably do. I
think it was at the final showdown. They did actually have them saying that.
Yeah.
Same as where they have at one point Pennywise or somebody, I think it's Patrick Hockstetter, yells here's Johnny or something.
Oh God, yeah, that annoyed me a little bit. I've got to say.
Yeah, it's like, okay, wind your neck in. Love,
yeah, we get it. There were a lot of Stephen King jokes in this, weren't there? A lot of Stephen King jokes. What about Stan? Let's talk about Stan as the kind of the absent Loser Club member. He has his moment where he commits suicide in the bath. You know, what did you think of that? How that was handled and how Stan was portrayed?
I wanted more information about his background as to why he does it. I'll be honest with you, it kind of works. I mean, my personal feelings on why he does it in the book is because he is such a logician. He literally decides, I am not prepared to continue functioning in a world where this can happen.
Because you said, he's the science one. He's the that's not empirically possible character.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, it was weird because that is so much against the whole idea that he's anti-Jewish tropes.
Yes.
Whereas in this one, it's almost like he's set up as Jesus, which is really weird. It's like he's going to die to save them all. It's like, what the fuck?
And it's hard. It's a hard. You know, I think without reading the book to know much about Stan and get who he is and what he's about. You know, I was sat on the other side of me was Rihanna, my girlfriend, who's never read it, the book. So she's seen the miniseries, she's seen the first film, but she saw the first film when it first came out. So it'd been 2 years, and it got to the scene with Stan, and she went, "Who's that again?" I said, "Oh, that's Stan. You know, he was the."
Yeah.
And I couldn't think what to say to her about the first one. I went, "He's the Jewish one." You know, like what else can you say about him? That's basically all he had going. You know, and she was like, "I don't remember him at all in the first one." You know, even seeing the child actor, she was like, "Don't remember him at all." So I think that kind of downplayed the emotional impact of Stan dying, you know, because it's a little bit like, well, who was he anyway? You know, that's which is a shame.
I agree. I think that contributed a lot to the change in the ending because it makes it almost happy.
Right.
It makes it that he's comfortable with what he's done. All those sequences where you see about the letters that he sends are very well lit.
Yes.
And it's almost like this is a nice goodbye.
Yeah.
Go off and live your lives and be happy people. It's exactly what I thought they'd do with it, whereby, because say, back when it was originally done, 40 was, life begins.
Right, yeah.
You know, in the sense of it, that was when you would, you were, if you were middle class white, yada yada, you would be settled down. You would have your picket fence. You would have your kid. Blah blah blah.
Yes.
Whereas now it's like, okay, next chapter. I mean, James McAvoy, I mean, for Christ's sake, when you look at him as Bill, he is, for Christ's sake, you've got him from Split. He's playing superheroes, and you can see it in his physique.
Yeah, definitely.
The first few sequences we see him in are looking up at him Dutch angle to show how powerful he is, and you see how bloody stocky he is. I mean, you see his muscles.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden now, it's almost like it doesn't matter that Stan died in a horrible way because he's happy and everybody else should be.
Yeah. And we'll get to the cheesiness of the ending.
Yeah.
Just want to ask you briefly about Mike then. So what have they done with Mike? What did you think? You said you were less keen on the performance of adult Mike. He's very much kind of used as a little bit of a device to sort of be like, this is what we need to do. This is the ritual. We get everyone back together. He's the one that drives the narrative, I suppose. But does he do much else?
No.
No.
He's another one, to be honest with you. I kind of lost my place a little bit because there was this whole thing about, he went off to an okay, so we've got the Mike Leigh's super duper magical Negro trope.
Yes.
And
that was what I thought too. That's kind of, again, it was a very old fashioned thing, it felt.
Very old, and then all of a sudden you're going to chuck in bloody, going with the Native American tribe and nicking all their secrets. What the who came up with that?
And again, it's so it feels like it's what people take the mick out of Stephen King for, isn't it? Like, oh, this was on an old Indian burial ground. It's what everyone says when they kind of talk about the most tropey Stephen King trope.
Yes. Oh, for Christ's sake, the drinking game with thinner. If you haven't done it, do it. And don't blame me afterwards. White man from town with it.
Yeah.
And the silly thing about all the Mike stuff is, again, I felt it actually in the book originally. The Ritual of Chud is a face-off between the Losers Club, it kind of mentally, and this kind of mystical being called the Turtle, which is called Maturin.
That's right. Yes.
Which I admit is batshit. Whereas I felt that the way they changed it actually makes it more complex because. There, at some point in Chud, they start saying, Mike, you've lied to us again. It's like, I didn't get the first time. What the fuck? And they become this whole thing about him. He's got this artifact, and he's got his journals, and he's at some point, he's spiked Bill's drink. And there's all this conclusion will definitely work. This is what we need to do. Well, that didn't work. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm frantically trying to remember what the hell you said, because I'm getting so distracted by all the fuzzes and whizzes and bangs that all I can see now is lots and lots of effects.
Yes, it's a load of old nonsense. All of the actual ritual side of it, it's all ridiculous. I was kind of happy to just blindly go with it to see where the what fun set piece we'll see next, basically. But yeah, it's one of those where if you think too much about the story, you go, hang on, they're what now? And they're doing what?
Well, yeah.
It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's very well performed. It looks beautiful.
Yeah.
If you think about it too much, your brain is going to melt.
Exactly.
And not in a good way.
Exactly.
With King, I always got the impression that realistically, with having the idea of maturing in a context in Chud, what's meant to happen is they supposedly bite each other's tongues mentally and tell each other riddles. That's the actual description from the book.
Okay.
It's batty, and I think to this day that he is basically taking the piss out of people trying to do a serious reading.
Maybe. Yeah,
maybe. It's so bizarre.
Yeah.
And yet they try and smush together, making it sound vaguely logical in terms of some kind of ancient legend, and at the same time they're still, the whole thing, as you say, the tokens, that is straight old Stranger Things D&DC. You've got to go and pick up your magical object.
Yes, exactly.
And smush them together. It's like, it doesn't really work, guys. You're using two different types of logic.
And it is the problem with the second half of it. It's the problem with the adult half of it, I think, is that it still feels like a children's story. It feels like a fairy tale.
Yes.
And sometimes it can appear a bit hokey when you have a whole bunch of adults going, right, we've got to do the ritual, we've got to defeat the thing. I think that would work if you were watching a bunch of 11-year-olds say that. But there's something about it, particularly the miniseries suffers with that, I think, when they're all like, form a circle and get the silver earrings, and there's something about it that feels very campy when you watch a bunch of grown-ups do that,
Yes.
And it does suffer from that a little bit with this. It feels like, hang on, what are we doing now?
Well, that's the bloody thing, to be honest with you. What really threw me at first, what I loved, because the kind of original challenge was going to be, how do you make it realistic for now, where you have just got mobile phones and Google Maps. What I loved was that their first reaction once they find out that Stan has died, right, in the restaurant sequence, is they'll go, sod this for a game of coconuts, we're going.
Yeah.
And I thought, hallelujah, we have adults with logic.
Yeah, no, totally. You totally would believe that, right? Yeah.
And they literally spend the kind of first half trying to get away, and literally, even Bill says to Mike, sorry mate, I'm going. And it's like, and then from that they suddenly do this weird thing whereby all of a sudden they start playing Cub Scouts, and it just doesn't make any sense. Because realistically, in that sense, what ends up happening is that it makes all the rest of it makes it look as though Mike is almost bizarrely pulling the wool over their eyes, which doesn't make any sense at all.
Right, yeah.
Considering all the special effects, and you start thinking it undermines Mike's character as much as anything else, because the whole point of one of the big differences with the book is that the whole way through the book you've got the interlude diaries.
Yes.
Whereby he's basically talking very realistically, and he actually includes a lot of real detail here about segregation, African American history, and all that stuff completely vanishes from the film.
Right, yeah.
And instead, because you've got all this Native American stuff, Mike in the book is a very believable character, probably the most.
Yes.
And yet in the film, he almost seems a bit deranged.
He does. He seems deranged. I think I agree. Even in the miniseries, Tim Reed, it was much more grounded, that character, he felt like. It was much more, you trusted him and you would follow him.
Yes.
Whereas, yes, you're right, this character just seems a lot more unhinged in the film, doesn't he? And I guess that kind of makes it interesting, but also it makes him a bit two-dimensional and, like we've said, a bit campy or something,
It does. And the other thing, one thing I was interested in was there's a lot of press reports. I have actually gone back through minutes and checked this, saying that originally they were going to make him a junkie.
Right. Okay, yeah.
Because that's what being in Derry had done to him.
Yeah.
And yet, I don't know if that is one of the bits I was saying earlier. I think they've changed the script where they probably took that out, because there were actually a number of articles online you can still find whereby people had actually written for things like The Conversation saying, okay, seriously, you're going to have the black dude as a criminal? Oh, thanks very much. Again.
So let's talk about the final act then. So you get this final showdown. Once they've all gone off on their own little mission, they've all got their tokens, they've all come back together, they go down into that house and they face off against Spider Pennywise, don't they? So it is... it's an improvement absolutely on the miniseries, which is it is a giant spider with a clown head, isn't it? Which is quite cool. I quite enjoyed that as a monster design. What did you think of this last act and the way it was done?
Very, very pretty.
Yeah, very pretty. Yeah,
Well acted. I thought again, Richie and Eddie. I thought that was ready. I thought it works there.
Yeah,
it was a lot of fun. Going straight to the final sequence. Okay, this is again. It sounds like I'm just criticising it. I really did enjoy it. It's more because I'm just rewriting my book now. My brain is still trying to compute it.
Of course.
What really got me at the end, after XYZ hasn't worked, they have to take Pennywise down his own form. Yeah, fine, fair enough, that makes sense. He becomes a baby, and then you get the camera is looking at up angles at the mall, and they're all yelling at him.
Yes.
And it's all of a sudden, okay, so the losers get to win by becoming bullies to what looks like a very old baby. What the hell? They're just, you're a baby. And they just advance on the poor little sod. I just thought, what the hell?
That's so true. I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah. Because basically what happens is, isn't it, they have to sort of overcome their fear of it and kind of go, you're nothing, you're a blah, blah, blah clown. And basically they insult it to death. So they've tried everything they can possibly try, and then the way they kill it is to insult it to death, essentially. Which is kind of interesting. Again, it feels a bit cheesy. It feels like that kind of 80s Labyrinth, you have no power over me, or the end of Nightmare on Elm Street, I'm not afraid of you.
That's
it's that
fine.
Classic, isn't it? It's that classic. But yeah, you're right. They all just stand and shout over it until it shrinks into a baby.
Yes. And that's what got me. It's like, they did it in the first film. The first film, yes, Pennywise stays the same size, and Bill literally goes up to him and says, we're not afraid anymore.
Yes.
Fine.
Yeah.
That's a massive difference. And you are just.
Yeah,
that's
right.
the difference.
Yeah, right,
and the fact they literally go over, and it's that up angle. And so in the first one, it's literally Bill who does the advance, and that makes more sense because it's before that you see his grief. It has presented as Pennywise. It's very nearly had him, and there is this sense of he's standing up for himself and them, and it works. And then Pennywise just does the backflip down the
the drain. Yeah.
Whereas realistically, in this one, to say he becomes this baby, and then they keep going. And if you look at the way, it cycles through all the fears in a sense that you've got Ben saying, "Oh, you're just a mummy," and all the rest of it. But they actually look so hateful.
Right.
They actually, I just thought, you've become the bullies. How the fuck did that happen?
And actually, do you know what? Skipping back slightly, speaking of bullies, we should talk about Henry Bowers as well. I've got to admit, I was not a fan of adult Henry Bowers. I thought they turned him into a comedy character or something.
Yeah.
What was with that weird scene? Again, I'd have to watch it again, but there's a very weirdly directed scene where he jumps Eddie in the bathroom, and then Eddie kind of stabs him from behind the shower curtain. That whole scene, did that feel weird to you? Something about that felt very weird to me, and it was almost played for laughs or something.
Oh, it was played for laughs.
I didn't quite get what they did with that whole thread. It was very odd, and then they just kind of disposed of Henry quite quickly, Well,
yeah, I think from the beginning where you first see Henry, where he's literally gibbering at the moon, it's like, mental health advocates are not going to love you guys for that.
No, and it didn't work.
Well, that's the sad thing about it, because the young Henry, Nicholas Hamilton, doesn't get as much kudos because people don't want to go for the bully.
No.
He's a brilliant actor. He's genuine. You see him in the apocalyptic rock fight. He's wonderful.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Whereas with this one, all that was kind of, you get a brief shot of him, basically getting arrested. And again, he's still got it.
He's great.
And yet,
fantastic.
And yet, as you say,
what was with the writhing, gurning adult Henry?
Silly.
It was very odd. Yeah, it was very odd.
Because I'm sure Teach Grant, the adult guy, fabulous actor. He looked the part, all the rest of it. But to me, the big thing that got me about that, thinking about it, is for one thing, adult Eddie. Okay, he makes a wisecrack about it.
Yes.
Thinking purely in terms of the film, it kind of works because he is a wisecracker, which at the same time, almost to be fair, almost doesn't work with the rest of his character as this incredibly neurotic, I forget what the word is, somebody's always worried about illness.
Hypochondriac.
Thank you. Yes. One thing that's really weird, actually, it suddenly occurred to me about that, is after he's got the thing through the cheek.
Yes, he's been stabbed in the cheek, right? Yeah.
It doesn't seem to bother him.
No, he just
doesn't
carries on.
Exactly. It's like, where's your swab? Fuck's sake, I would be getting a swab.
But that's the thing, it felt like a comedy moment, that
Yes.
bit, and it was just, I found it very odd. I was like, am I supposed to be laughing at this? I found it so weird, you know, when you're not quite sure what a scene is trying to do. Is this supposed to be suspenseful? Is this supposed to be funny? It was just the timing of it was very odd. I found it very odd, the whole Henry Bowers. I could have done with them almost axing adult Henry altogether, you know, in some ways, you know.
Yeah.
It was bizarre.
It was weird because, I mean, it's particularly weird considering that Eddie's object is the aspirator. So even though he's still, you know, if it was a case that, like Ben, he'd gotten over it, fine.
Yeah.
Or he'd managed to, but seriously, he's still carrying a bloody aspirator. It doesn't make any sense that he would be happy not patching himself. I think he was just getting Elastoplast.
Yeah.
It just, and I mean, the way that, and to say, I mean, that on its own would have been one thing, but the way he plays the character is so hijinks, and particularly in that last half hour where he's with Eddie, and they basically, you know, they go into the house, they see I can't think what the girl's name is now, the girl who we saw in the first house where they say, you know, where are her legs.
Oh right, yeah.
And it's like you see this very well done kind of animatronic coming towards you,
yes.
and it's just like, whoa, don't go in that drop. And it does become just fun. It actually it tips over too much into this is just a giggle now.
This is you're talking about the section with the 3 doors. With
Yes.
the very scary, not scary.
Yes.
It is. It's a comedy.
Yes.
That's a comedy moment, isn't it? I think.
I mean, I wonder if so much of this, I mean, again, this is not going to be popular, but I wonder if so much of this, as I was saying at Fright Fest the other day, is that they've realised in terms of merchandising that they're going to sell a hell of a lot more Funkos if they make Pennywise fun.
Yeah, probably.
And it's, you know, realistically, it's almost, it would be impossible to get the scare factor that Tim Curry had. So everything becomes, and for Christ's sake, I mean, if you look at a lot of the merchandise that's coming out now, people, you know, things like you can buy the boat, you can buy the balloons, you can buy the figurines. So it makes it something that doesn't scare you, but something that's, again, Stranger Things hijinks.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, totally. So anything else you want to mention about that final showdown before we get to the end of the film? I mean, like you say, it's a bit of a cheesy moment. They shouted it to death. They bully it to death, essentially. Eddie dies as well, we should mention, doesn't he?
Oh, yes. And
we lose Eddie.
That was weird because I thought I would get sadder about that. Because
Right.
I, as I say, I actually prefer the character in the film to that in the book.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite well done. And the thing that kind of got me was the amount of crap that they put into the special effects. I mean, the whole thing, I mean, the Jessica Chastain thing about getting drowned in the toilet. Heart says, I really like that. They sold it. Head says, again, was it necessary? But then again, what they were obviously doing to do was bringing together her and Ben in that kind of almost... in that fantasy, I mean, the sheer fact they meet each other in water. I mean, you've got classic kind of weird ritual washing time.
Yes.
And I must admit, I did think both of those worked.
It was handled well.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I have a bladder the size of a pea, and by that time I'd completely forgotten about it. I did enjoy it.
Exactly, that's it. Same here. I can always judge a film by how many toilet trips I do, and I did none for 2 hours and 50 minutes. So there you go. That can only be a good thing.
Exactly.
You know, basically what they've done is they put in the time, I think, with most of these characters, and these actors were good enough that I was invested enough, even when it gets as ridiculous as it gets. You know,
it does.
That's the thing. So we get that kind of. After we kill Pennywise, it does get extremely cheesy. Like you said, they go into this like ritual washing.
Yes.
They jump into the lake and they all watch.
That.
Ben and Bev have a little smooch. Richie loses his glasses, and they all have a group hug.
Yes.
And it you know, we were into Stephen King cheesy territory here, for the ending.
Sorry, I love that bit.
But absolutely, you know, that's it's after whatever it is, 5.5 hours, it's been earned. Maybe that's the thing. And then we get that ending where Bill is writing the book, right? He's writing what I'm assuming is actually it, right? Is it that word for word he's writing? Yes, I saw you get very excited at this point. So he is actually writing Stephen King's It, right? So it's like he's writing a book of everything that's happened to him, and then he phones Mike, is it? And they speak on the phone. So that was an interesting little, it kind of brings it full circle there, right?
Yes.
Did you like that?
Oh, I by that point, I'd just given up. I was just sobbing.
You were an emotional wreck.
I really was. I mean, most of the bit where it says "be brave, be true," that is word for word from the child version of the Ritual of Chud, because they do Chud twice in the original. I felt I did actually feel it earned it, because there is this sense of, because the big difference is in this one, they get to keep their memories. One thing that always bothered me about the book was that you do get Ben and Bev together. And I always thought, well, completely aside from the whole thing about how she only loves him when he's hot. Again, there's this whole thing about, are they being somehow, I forget what the word is now, damn it, where they are just supporting each other because they've both been through trauma.
Right.
You know what, I can't think what damn it is. Codependent. Because they don't know each other. And yet all of a sudden they're in love, because in the book, very much, it's that, and again in the first film, that that Bill and Bev are the two who get it on. I mean, for Christ's sake, in the first film, they actually end up snogging. Yes. And it still doesn't really make sense to me as to how all of a sudden they get that happy ending. Yes. Then again, what I really like about it is the fact that there is, what we have now, I think, is an increasing recognition that people can come back from trauma. Yes. And don't need for it to define them. Realistically, we live a lot older now, and we have a lot more sense about what is possible. And this is why I felt it was very much more the film of a guy who wants things to, who does do a lot of activism. Yes. But who's actually saying you can start again and you can lead a good life. And in that, I mean, the core message of the original book is that imagination is the way out of it. The way they beat it in the original, it isn't about shouting at it. They literally, in a child version, what ends up happening is Bill says, I'm going to believe in the Tooth Fairy. I'm going to believe in Santa Claus. I'm going to believe that a policeman will help me if I ask, regardless of what all these other adults will do. And that's how he gets rid of him in the first one. In the second one, he literally tells Pennywise, my parents blamed me for Georgie's death and that was wrong. Yes. And that's how, it kind of loses its hold and they'll go. And they'll sit crying in the dark. I felt it was a nicer way of moving forward, because the whole idea of it is if you change the way you think about the world, your world it won't change completely, because it never can. Hence, they get to keep the memories. Yeah. But you can make the best of what you've got and not be haunted by it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And that is why I was crying my soul.
Yeah. It's great. It worked. It clearly worked for you, definitely, didn't it? There you go. But that's awesome. That's brilliant. So overall then, I mean, do you think, It Chapter 1 and 2 together, I suppose, is this the definitive version of It that we're ever going to get? I mean, could they have done, I mean, it's an epic book. It's an epic story. There are so many characters. There's so much going on. And it's wacky as anything. It's batshit. Is this as good as we're ever going to get in terms of an adaptation of this story, do you think?
My personal suspicion is that we will see another one.
Yeah, I'm sure we will at some point down the line. Yeah,
because the story itself lends itself to adaptation. I mean, the whole thing, it's, as I say, there's a process called euhemerization, whereby basically stories will get repeated over time. It's the nature of stories. I mean, there's a very famous book by a guy called Christopher Brooker called The 7 Basic Plots. And you know it. I know it, it's great. It's fabulous, and it's also really easy to read, which is beneficial.
Yes, it is,
unlike most academia. But I mean, the thing is, I was almost surprised in some ways that they didn't have a trans character getting beaten. But then again, I think bearing in mind this is Warner, it's huge, etc., etc., etc. I suspect that leading with Adrian was probably about as far as they dare go, because a lot of people I've spoken to about this over the time have actually said that they felt that the story of Adrian, because it's a queer awareness story, is far more. They felt it was unnecessary, because a lot of people don't necessarily think about the identity politics side of it, because particularly people who've just seen the miniseries. They don't really connect the characters. They always think of Bill because his is obvious. They sometimes think of Ben. Even with Ben, Brandon Crane as a kid was not, he wasn't fat. He was slightly larger.
Totally.
Bev, there's this whole thing of people don't know, okay, so was it because she was a girl? Was it because she was poor? Was it People can read what they want into it. Whereas with Adrian, it's so on the nose, and it's so much obviously about hate crime.
Yes.
which is also why I suspect they probably toned him down, because, I mean, for Christ's sake, we're now, back in the day when it first came out, you had, AIDS was really, really huge. People were very worried about that. But it was also a case that society was a lot more segmented, whereas now, for Christ's sake, RuPaul's Drag Race is mainstream.
Yeah.
It's, you could quite easily have had somebody doing it absolutely flaming queer. As I say, Don Haggerty is described as, he's wearing satin pants so tight the cop can see the wrinkles in his cock, and that's actually the words it use. Adrian, in the film, he's got, I think it's a beaver or something.
Right, yeah.
Whereas in the book, it's like a massive top hat with a great silly flower on.
Yes. I can see why they would worry that, portraying a gay character, and the only gay character, as flamboyant as that in 2019 would be problematic, even though that is how he's described in the book. You could see why they'd say, that's dated now, that idea, isn't it?
With Adrian, he is wearing very normal clothes. His behaviour is very similar. Mm-hmm. He actually does, come on, love, I'll strip for you, which is a bit further. He doesn't actually say that in the book.
Because his boyfriend is very much like, heteronormative, isn't he?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, in the book, Don is his... what he says is very sensible. The second he realises it says, this is actually... They realise they're in trouble. Yes, Don is very flamboyant, but he realises when to get the fuck out.
Yes.
Adrian actually goes further vocally, but you don't notice. And also, I mean, the thing I noticed as well is the ages of the different kids who do it. And also, while all this is happening, you have this absolutely beautiful visual of the bridge and all of the balloons that begin to drift up. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, oh, Jesus, yeah, seriously, I've got to have a bank of balloons in my flat.
I love it. You've been carrying a balloon around with you all week. I keep spotting Charlie out and about in London because I can see a red balloon everywhere. I absolutely love it. Amazing. It's the sort of film that I'm sure we'll continue to talk about over the next few weeks. People are going to see it. There's going to be a lot of discourse. I can already see it online. There's people that some reviews have been quite negative about it. I think some people are going to love it. Some people are going to really hate it, I expect. But that's what makes this film interesting, I think. Yes. And it is bold, and it is out there, and it is batshit, and it does have problems, but in quite an interesting way. I think it gives us more to talk about, doesn't it?
I think, to be brutally honest, I think I'm being very, very hard on it. As I say, my brain is currently very much in critical mode.
Of course it is. And, that's what you do when we sit here and we go through a film in as much as we just have with a fine-tooth comb. We are going to find things wrong with it, aren't we? But overall, we said we both enjoyed the experience. I mean, you cried at the end,
loved
so
it.
there you go.
I really... There's a couple of bits, as I say, I mean, some of it I'm also well aware that because I was so emotional going into it, that I may have missed bits because I was so busy kind of being hit by several truckfuls of, oh my God!
Yes, I can confirm that's what was happening, yes.
I really enjoyed it. I mean, particularly the bits with Richard, the Bunyan stuff, they could not have done that better. I loved him forever for that. Yeah, it was great. It was really good, and I'm really intrigued to see what people are going to think of it. So, can't wait. Charlie, thank you so much for joining me once again. This has been so much fun. Just remind us again, where can people find you out there in the world if they want to come and have a go at you about your opinions on it? Come on, if you think you're on the bitches, I know my shit. Basically, I now have a blog, huzzah. It is Dr. Charlie, CHARLIE .blog.
Love it.
And all of my stuff is there. I have... There's a couple of other interviews that I have been doing that will pop up on there. I've written... a load of stuff on it for Starburst magazine.
Brilliant.
Here, there, and everywhere, basically. And come and yell at me on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. And just be warned, I will fanboy on your ass.
It's true, he will. Charlie, thank you so much. And that's it for now. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to my brilliant guest, Charlie Allbright. Charlie's book is really going to be something to behold. I think I cannot wait for it to come out later this year and give it a read. And if you want to hear more of Charlie, simply sign up to our Patreon and you can hear us discussing even more Stephen King's It. That's our discussion of the book, of the miniseries, and of It Chapter 1. That's patreon.com/evolutionofhorror. So, what did you think of It Chapter 2? Do you agree with our thoughts? Do you agree with some of our reservations? I'd love to hear from you guys. Please do get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on Letterboxd. And there is also a discussion group. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, where you can discuss the movie, horror, anything you like with fellow listeners. That can be found on Facebook. You can find all previous episodes of this podcast, 4 seasons, and a whole bunch of other bonus content on our website. Simply go to evolutionofhorror.com. And you can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, Libsyn, and various others. If you get a chance, please do subscribe to us. Please do spread the word about us, tweet about us. And if you haven't done so already and you want to support the podcast in some way, please do take a couple of minutes to leave us a little rating or review. It will be hugely appreciated. That's it for now. Thank you so much for listening. Join us very soon for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.